Well, Casey, speaking of Elon Musk and DOGE and the Trump administration, we have a very exciting interview to share on the show today.
Yes, an interview that we should say we conducted before all of the dramatics on social media on Thursday between Musk and Trump.
So last week, before any of this happened, when Donald Trump and Elon Musk were still friends, a former DOGE employee, Sahil Lavingia, published a really fascinating blog post about his 55 days that he spent working for DOGE. He was stationed inside the Department of Veterans Affairs as a software engineer. He's a veteran startup worker. He worked at Pinterest. He then started a company called Gumroad, which is sort of an e-commerce platform. And I think this is a really important conversation to have because despite the fact that Elon Musk is now persona non grata in the Trump administration, DOGE is still there. Its employees are still stationed throughout the federal government. And so I wanted to take the chance to have a rare conversation with someone who has actually worked for DOGE inside the federal government and who has seen what it's like up close.
Let's bring him in.
Sahil Lavingia, welcome to Hard Fork.
Thank you.
So, Sahil, you have been around Silicon Valley for a while. You had a pretty good thing going. You were one of the first employees at Pinterest. You then went on to found your own company, Gumroad. What made you interested in stepping away and moving to Washington, D.C. to work for the federal government?
Yeah, I've always wanted to work for the federal government. I think it's such a cool opportunity. I mean, as a software engineer, which is my background, product designer, I think it's hard to think of another opportunity for such a large impact. I think when I was even in high school, I always felt like I would eventually want to work for the federal government. When I left San Francisco, I remember feeling like the only things that private businesses were responsible for were like little jewel boxes on Mission Street. Mm-hmm. It was like powered by public infrastructure. And so eventually, if you're a competent software engineer and you want to really have a maximized impact on the world, the Steve Jobs sort of dent in the universe sort of thing, like you'd have to go work for the government eventually.
I can imagine that the past few administrations might have been happy to accept your help. Why was this the moment that you wanted to step in?
Yeah, I mean, I actually applied to work at USDS back in the day. So I think around 2015 when Gumroad, we failed to raise our Series B, laid off most of the team, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. I applied to USDS. But I think my background at the time was it's very startup-y. Mm-hmm. Which is not exactly, like the Venn diagram overlap of skill sets with what you may need at the federal government, like the largest company on earth. Mm-hmm. Never heard back, didn't expect to, with the government being what it is. And when this sort of DOGE thing started to happen, I felt like, this meets the criteria of shipping code for the federal government. And yeah, I wanted to work there.
How did the hiring process go? Did they do any kind of like ideological or political filtering? Did they ask you like, what do you think about, foreign aid or USAID or anything like that?
I was asked, did I vote for Kamala Harris, for example, right? Mm-hmm. And basically, like if you voted for Kamala Harris, like you shouldn't waste your time here. Like you're not going to get through whatever the process ends up looking like. This is pre-inauguration. So pre-inauguration, there's a Trump, this kind of has to flow through the Trump transition team. And I said, look, I actually didn't vote for Kamala. I didn't vote for Trump either. So it's, if they need that, then it's not going to really work out. My guess is, this kind of came from Trump and that side of the DOGE, I don't think cared too much.
So they approve your application and then what happens? You just kind of get assigned a role?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I feel like I never even got sort of an approval. Like it wasn't like congratulations or here's your offer letter, here's your salary, here's your boss, here's your department, that sort of stuff. That basically what happened was, I passed, I guess, to some degree. Then eventually they said, hey, we have a role for you at the VA as a software engineer. You should go talk to this sort of DOGE team lead at the VA, and if that seems like something you'd want to do, let us know. And so that's kind of what happened. It wasn't like an approval. It was just we have a spot for you at VA if you want it. And I talked to them, and eventually they said, if you're interested, you have to get fingerprinted here in DC. And so it's sort of this chicken and egg thing where it's you're not going to get any information until you move to DC. And once you move to DC, you're kind of you're here, right? So and so I never actually, I mean, even today, I still don't know what my salary was. I assume it's zero, but every once in a while I get a check in the mail for some de minimis payment, which I assume is to make sure I'm not.
Wait, you didn't talk about your salary before you agreed to take this job?
I'm a phenomenal negotiator.
Yeah, that's That's
I didn't know.
strange.
I mean, the day that I'll tell you the facts I knew, right?
Yeah.
So I knew that I was supposed to show up 7:45 a.m. at VA, the VACO sort of Veterans Affairs Central Office in D.C. On March 17th, and actually that's all I knew. So yeah, I didn't know. I didn't know who my boss was. I think I learned like the third day or something, like who I didn't know my role. It doesn't say your role like on your badge. I basically got my PIV card and I got a government laptop, which they call GFE, government furnished equipment. And then the sort of DOGE people there kind of walked me through what I was supposed to be doing, what they were working on, and I was sort of there to like offer my technical expertise. Though the laptop I got, for example, I couldn't run Python on it, I couldn't run Git, I couldn't download anything, and so I had to like work through this exercise of being able to cook
Right.
without any equipment.
I want to ask a little bit about the orientation. You mentioned that some of the folks at DOGE explained to you what they were working on. You were there presumably to serve the veterans of the United States. Did you have discussions with DOGE about this is sort of who we serve, this is what they need, this is sort of how we want to make things better for them? Or was it sort of more focused on sort of cutting costs and that sort of thing?
Yeah, the DOGE conversations were around cutting costs. I think there's the Venn diagram overlap of, at the end of the day, I'm an employee. At least that's what my badge said. I'm an employee for VA. You go through the VA specific onboarding. There's no DOGE specific onboarding. You got a VA laptop. I have the iCare little memorandum on my backpack now. And so, I was always like, this has to meet the filter of like what the VA wants, right? Nothing's going to happen if the VA doesn't want it. And so it kind of has to meet two criteria for something to be interesting, right? You have to sort of save money and make the veteran experience better, or at least not make it worse. But it wasn't like an explicit conversation of like, okay, how do we actually ship software to make veteran experience better? I had a lot of those conversations, because I was interested in doing that. So I just would meet with the office of the CTO, which actually was like pretty well developed at VA because the USDS OG had kind of built a coalition there. They use GitHub, they have Slack, that sort of stuff.
That's really interesting because I think that the larger narrative that people have heard from DOGE and from Elon Musk and people who are affiliated with him is that sort of once you start looking under the hood inside these government agencies, you find all kinds of waste and fraud and abuse and skeletons in the closet. And like basically what you're saying is that you were surprised by how well the VA worked. Am I hearing that right?
I was surprised by how effective the government is. At the end of the day, though, like you're sort of defining effectiveness by like what you're asked to do. And so I do think that government is asked to do a lot of weird stuff. They tend to be quite effective at doing those things. But Congress, I think, has a role to play in this. You can think of Congress as like the worst PM you've ever met, right? And you're asked to like build an app with all these weird specifications. Like you're doing a job, but you're kind of like playing Twister as an organization to like do it. But surprisingly, yeah, I mean, there are many meetings I was in where I sort of maybe came in a little bit antagonistic to, adversarial to like why is this contract $40 million to like, process claims or something. And I would leave being like, oh, I get it. Like that it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, you wrote in that post about this DOGE all-hands meeting where Elon Musk was taking questions that one of the things he was sort of asking the DOGE employees for was ideas about how to improve the public perception of DOGE, which I imagine at this point was getting, sort of all kinds of criticism for gutting various agencies and laying people off and cutting foreign aid and things like that. Did it seem to you at any point during this experience that Elon Musk and other DOGE leaders were interested in solving actual problems, or were they just concerned about the appearance of productivity and efficiency?
I think maybe I'm naively optimistic, but I think there was truly like a desire to solve problems, because that's how you save money at the end of the day is you solve problems, you kill two birds with one stone, that sort of thing. That's what software can do. I think my guess is that, for example, at the meeting, I suggested like we should live stream this meeting. I think like this would help, right? Like if people saw like how the sausage was made and how it, we weren't like scheming on like how to, kill a bunch of African children. Like I think it would sort of help the brand image. And he embraced the idea. I mean, he was like, that sounds awesome. We should do it next week. Let's do it next week. We'll start doing it next week. Unfortunately, there was no other meeting that I was a part of. So I never like got to follow up on that like next week thing. Like I didn't get the invite. Did it happen? I didn't hear about it on Twitter. Like what's going on? My guess is like to sort of like the most optimistic, good faith take would be that like they were truly interested in these kinds of ideas, but the Trump admin wasn't. I think people realized pretty quickly like this was not going to be like this sort of walk in the park, and let's just focus on what we can do, which turned out to be like cutting contracts. But at the end of the day, like a bunch of software engineers it's not really necessary for that effort.
Well, so tell us a bit about the cutting contracts piece. You have this situation where folks like yourself who are sort of, public spirited, want to see if they can make a contribution, parachute in, they're assigned a role at an agency they have no prior familiarity with, and then are just sort of asked to hack millions of dollars out of the budget. How did that work?
Yeah, so one of the Trump EOs is that the DOGE team gets to sit in on a lot of contracting meetings, and so we sort of helped them review as many contracts as they could. And then beyond that, it's just like lending my technical expertise, right? It's just basically sitting in on a meeting where someone will say, we're like paying, $4 million for this like chatbot on VA Gov, like how, and I'm like, well, like that would take me like a week to build and integrate. And, could you explain why that costs so much more money? And, just trying, a lot of it was just like there was somebody in the room that had coded before. I think that was a lot of it. It's like you're paying a lot of money for things without the domain expertise to understand how much it should cost. So I was like hopefully somewhat the credible expert, quote unquote, who would come in and talk to Booz or Deloitte and just be like, hey, do you guys use Cursor? Like how, what are the efficiency gains? Like, could you pass them on to us? Like, could you shave like 25% off the bill? That sort of thing. At the end of the day, like we didn't have any I think a lot of people think DOGE had a lot of power to fire, and at least from my perspective at VA, we did not. Like the EOs don't give us that power. Like unless VA is willing to give us the keys, like we can't drive the car. But we could sit in meetings and we could sort of, kind of be annoying, right? And just ask questions.
I mean, I wanted to ask you about these meetings because I think there's this popular image that at least was going around during the early days of DOGE that DOGE was sort of just this group of like, kids in, hoodies who would like barge into these meetings with very experienced civil servants and, demand to know what they were working on and would sort of just sort of run in and rip things up and that it offended a lot of the career employees of the agencies where they were stationed. Was that what you witnessed? Were you the sort of archetypal guy in a hoodie coming in and telling these people, these 30-year veterans of the VA, how to do their jobs?
I was not that person. I did not wear a hoodie. I wore a shacket, a little bit of an upgrade. But yeah, I mean, I think that I'm sure to some degree that was happening. Frankly, like I do think I'm not saying this. I don't think that these stories are made up generally. Like I think they come from truth. And there was generally this vibe of like, they're not going to help us or like they're kind of going to like give us the wrong information and cause us to go down this path, which I think is probably common in a transition period, right? Like I think every set of transitions, you have sort of a bunch of political appointees that come in and you have a new boss that doesn't really know what they're doing. Everyone's had that manager that doesn't really understand like why is someone taking so long or why is it, that sort of thing. But I don't think it was like as much like this idea of this office space, interview process. Like even the RIF, right? I learned
RIF is the reduction in force, aka layoffs.
Exactly. The reduction in force, the workforce optimization initiative where Trump wants to cut the federal workforce. That entire EO is basically about making a recommendation to the White House about what to do. It's not about actually firing anyone. And specifically for that EO, it gives DOGE zero power to fire anyone. So this idea of these office space conversations where you're asking like, so what are you doing here? Like there's no point in that. I was, however, I will say like I was on the older side of the engineers, like of people who are like identified as software engineers. I think there were maybe 2 or 3 people who were like above the age of 30. And most people were like relatively young, had probably not worked a ton in private companies even, and it's just different too, right? I think like the culture, there's this like culture clash, lost in translation thing.
Are there any like anecdotes or stories from your time at DOGE that would help illustrate the culture clash?
I would swear, and I remember someone telling me something like, you like that will get you fired. It's just like interesting, like the rules and regulations that exist that sort of define conduct There's just a lot of those things. Even the DRP massively did not work. Like I think
What's the DRP?
The DRP, the deferred resignation program, the fork in the road emails.
I see.
Right. Which are incredible. Like from someone who works in the private industry, like you get 8 months of severance. Like that's a lot. Like, that's pretty good, But like the numbers of people who took it was like drastically low. And I think there's just like this cultural disconnect of like, why are you here? Well, you're here to like work for the government for life. Like, so like an extra 8 months doesn't compute. Like you're on a completely different career path. It's not like you're just going to exit the government and then go work at X. Or, there's a completely different ways of thinking about how you want to live your entire life. So I think that was like a big cultural disconnect. Like, why don't you just get paid more work, like here? Like, I think it took time for me at least to understand that like these people love their jobs. Like these people, like everyone loves their jobs. And I think that's kind of a lot of like the sort of disconnect culturally is like inefficiency versus efficiency. It's like everyone sounds the same, like looks the same, dresses the same, but like the way they make decisions then manifests, very, very, very differently.
Well, what was making you swear so much, Sahil?
I swear a lot. I just swear a lot. I just think I just kind of a San Francisco pirate mentality or something like that. But it wasn't in anger. It wasn't at anybody, but just like why the f is this so weird? Like it's just like this kind of like surprised emotion that I can't really help but express in that way.
I can't believe you just swore on our podcast, Sahil.
I know. Please,
you're
cut that
fired.
out.
Get out of here. Don't let the door
I
hit
used to make like I'll give you one example, like a little bit of a culture, like sarcasm. Like sarcasm just doesn't exist in the government workplace for some of these reasons. Where I'd come in and they'd be like, "What are you here for?" And I'm like, "I'm here to riff everybody," and it's like dead.
Wait, you thought that was gonna go over well? You gotta read the room, dude.
I know. That's part of the culture. I'm not very good at reading. I'm good at writing code, not reading rooms. Right? Like it's like a kind of tends to be a different.
Yeah, I
set
can
of
see
skills.
how that one didn't go over well. Hey, I'm new here. I'm gonna let you all off.
So maybe the story was about
workshop
me.
that one next time.
Yeah, let's work on that.
I'm curious. I think a lot of people, Sahil, will be listening to this and thinking, this guy sounds really naive. He hears about this Doge thing. I think a lot of people, especially on the left, think that Doge is sort of just a kind of pretext for an ideological purge. If they look at what the agency has been doing inside these various federal bureaucracies, trying to essentially purge any hint of leftism or wokeism in what these agencies are doing, and they will say Sahil should have known better than to expect that he was going to go in and actually be valued for his expertise in coding. He did not know that he was signing up for, or he should have known that he was signing up for something very different than that. What is your response to that?
Of course, the New York Times would say that.
Get his ass.
No, I mean, look, at the end of the day, it's like when I joined Pinterest and people were like, that startup's not going to work, right? And it's just like statistically no, but maybe yes. And if it's the maybe is that has an outsized impact, then it sort of the math ends up working. And so that's what I felt. I felt like, look, I think that's like I think all startup people are naive. I think that's part of like what makes us startup people is that we're not willing to sort of just like listen to the traditional, this is why we don't do that, or it's just like, no, we're not going to do that thing, and then you learn the hard way, But also every once in a while you get an iPhone or you get AI or something like that. But yeah, if people are like, hey, you failed, I'd be like, yeah, that's like what happens. But lots of things are a waste of time, and I have time, so I'm going to try.
Let's just close the loop, Sahil, on why you were let go from the government. You suggested in your blog post that your leading theory for why you were riffed, as you put it, is because you talked to a journalist at Fast Company. Is that still your understanding of why you were let go?
Yeah, I never heard anything from them. All I heard was like, did you run this by anyone at Doge? No, I did not run it by anybody. And then a day later, my access, I just got an email from GitHub, basically, that was just like, you're no longer a member of the VA on GitHub. I was like, oh, what happened? And turned out I was riffed. But yeah, that's all I've heard. I've never heard from anyone affiliated with Doge since then, So like on anything I've done that, like they just kind of ghosted me.
That seems very sudden as a way to get laid off or to find out that you have been laid off. Did that process, that ghosting, as you described it, change the way you felt about your time with Doge?
Yeah, I mean, it honestly made me feel like I wasn't going crazy. Like I felt like I was misreading the room, and I was just like, clearly we have a good goal. We, like why do we keep making these kind of mistakes? Why are we so unempathetic? And when I just got, you know, ghosted, right? Like just disappeared. My access just stopped working. No response. Honestly, it made me feel good in a way that like I wasn't the problem here. Like just that this is just the culture of this weird entity. It's like this emergent behavior of like lack of empathy that exists in these systems, I think, and everyone gets to blame somebody else and kind of opt out of their own. But yeah, I mean, I think it gave me this sense of like, my wife was right. This was not exactly like the best use of my time. Like, unfortunately, the only way to learn that, was to kind of, the FOMO was real, right? At the end of the day.
Well, it's a powerful reminder that I think a lot of other, Silicon Valley CEOs could learn, which is listen to your wife. She's onto something.
I think it's helpful. I think it is. And, now she tells me something, I'm like, my default is yes.
Well, if Doge has done one good thing, it's made your marriage more harmonious. So congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm curious how you think about the theory of Doge. I think one thing that often occurs to me when I hear people in tech talking about the government and bureaucracy is the idea that efficiency is sort of the ultimate good, right? That if you have a system that is slow moving and has friction involved in it, and it's using outdated technology, that it is an unquestionable good to go in and kind of smooth those bumps, to make things faster, more efficient, cheaper. There's also, I would say, something about government that is potentially inefficient by design, right? Part of the reason that things in government take longer than they do in the private sector is because governments are not businesses, right? They have to account for real constituents. They have to weigh various priorities against each other, sometimes conflicting priorities. They have to sort of do the deliberative process before they embark on something that could potentially change people's lives. And I'm curious if you still think this sort of Silicon Valley attitude is needed in Washington, if that is something that the federal government should have more of, or if you are coming to the view that maybe these are just two different agendas.
I do think there's a synthesis here, which is, I think if you define the goals accurately, then efficiency is better. Like if you're able to meet those objectives, but spend less money doing it, or make it faster, or require people to fill out less forms, then it is better. Just efficiency is better. I think the lost in translation thing is Silicon Valley doesn't serve every person, right? But if the government has a program, it's going to have to serve everybody, right? So I think efficiency is still a good. I think it's just really important to understand like what are the constraints. I personally think like the better word would be sort of like modernization or simplification. Like efficiency, I think, has now just such a loaded connotation to it, just like cut, get rid of, things like that. But I do think simplifying things, taking two systems that, I think what tends to happen is the government just stacks things on top of things that exist. It doesn't often refactor code and like combine systems. Like there's a lot of agencies, each agency spun up to do a new thing. And I do think it would be good to simplify every once in a while and sort of say, hey, these three things that came up in three different eras, we could now sort of merge.
I'm sure many people are sympathetic to the idea that the government is not as efficient as it could be, and they would love to see various aspects of it modernized so that the government was just easier to use. My instinct for how to do that would be to do it slowly and carefully by bringing in a lot of expertise and then giving them the time to work. The DOGE approach was to sort of bring in a bunch of people who don't have the relative expertise, ask them to get a ton done in a hurry, and apply this kind of ready, fire, aim approach to the federal government. So I think there are a lot of Americans right now who are looking at DOGE and seeing it as a kind of catastrophe where we've sort of disabled vast swaths of the federal government to no apparent benefit. And I wonder how, as somebody who worked on it, what you say to people who just see DOGE as a catastrophe.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate. You know, I don't regret my time there because I didn't work on those specific projects, and I think I had a positive impact. You know, it's like, you know, do you throw the baby out with the bathwater? Hopefully I was more the baby. But yeah, it's unfortunate. As another Doge engineer said, like, mistakes were made. You know, I don't know if the people who made the mistakes felt they were mistakes, but from the perspective of people who really wanted to come in and just work hard and make changes, you know, I think it was less than ideal. But at the end of the day, this is like a Trump administration. That's who Americans voted for. Some Americans are very happy with what's happened, you know, and would like more of it to happen. And we live in a democracy, and I'm just not like an opt-out type of person. Like, I'm only on Earth for a short amount of time. I can't wait for like some person or some party that I really agree with, and I'm only going to work there if I really like align with everything they do. And I have a lot of faith, frankly, that there are a lot of checks and balances, that either these systems will come back, that they were blocked. You know, there are a lot of things that prevent this ready, aim, fire. That gun never actually goes off. It looks like it goes off. Everyone reports like it went off, but then a judge rolls it back. And so I think, you know, it is this naive optimism. And unfortunately, you know, it's kind of confirmation. It's like, I am who I am, you know, I'm not going to change. Like, I really believe in using software to make the world better.
Well, I think that's a good place to end. Sahil, thank you so much for coming, and welcome back to civilian life.
Thank you. It's great.
Thanks, Sahil.
After our interview, we reached out to the White House for comment on Sahil Lavingia's experience at DOGE, in particular about the political questions he says he was asked when he was being vetted for a position at DOGE. The White House said that basically you are allowed to ask people political questions when they're being vetted for political appointments like roles at DOGE, and that DOGE employees understood their general responsibilities to cut waste. We also asked for some more details about Sahil's termination. The White House referred those questions to the VA, but the VA did not get back to us.
Hey, that's the end of this clip. If you liked what you saw, head on over to our page and subscribe, and you can get the full podcast. We do a show like this almost every week on tech and the future. Head on over there now and subscribe.